Well, thank you, Anne. It's such a pleasure to see you, and I see you've got Hansard behind you, so you've been keeping abreast of parliamentary debates. But how did you find your religious views affected your political career?
I don't think in those days it was quite such an issue. A lot of people held traditional religious views. If you remember, for example, when the vote on gay marriage went through the Commons, the majority of Conservative MPs actually voted against it. So it wasn't such a big issue then. It wasn't, for example, anything like as controversial as my stand on the war on drugs. So in those days, it was less controversial. But interestingly, when Hansard put together a commemorative volume for one of its anniversaries, and it asked some MPs to choose speeches. Now, I chose one by Enoch Powell on the embryology bill for one simple reason. He actually mentioned God. And you can't do that nowadays in the House of Commons. He did. I can't absolutely be certain that it was the last time anybody did, but it must have been pretty near.
Yes, I have mentioned God, actually, occasionally in the House of Commons, but you're quite right. The Almighty doesn't come on very regularly into political discussion. Do you think William Hague is right when he said that nobody who now is not in favour of gay marriage could become a leader of the Conservative Party, and therefore ruling out anyone who shares the orthodox teaching of the church we both belong to?
Well, not only our church, I mean, that is the teaching of Islam as well. That is also, in its vague way, still the teaching of the Church of England, because you cannot have a priest performing gay marriage in Anglican churches. So it is very widely held by different religions. But what really struck me was this. Kate Forbes was challenged, and they said, would she want to reverse the measure? Would she want to undermine it in any way? And she said no. But she answered straightforwardly when asked, had she been voting on it, which way would she have voted? Now, I wasn't in the House of Commons when that bill went through. I would have voted against it. Now, I made that clear in speeches outside the House of Commons. So what the real intolerance is not Kate Forbes, because Kate Forbes is saying, I don't agree with this, but I do not seek to reverse it. But her critics are saying, you've no right to disagree with it in the first place. And if you do disagree with it, you can't hold high office. Now, I think William Hague and the critics of Kate Forbes are wrong. True tolerance means saying, I don't agree with you, but I respect your right to your opinion.
Yes, and that must be the right way of putting it. But what's surprising about Lord Hague is that he is quite a tolerant figure in most areas. And I think you were his Shadow Home Secretary and worked very closely with him. Were you surprised that somebody who you'd worked closely with came down with such an intolerant view of something that's been believed by people of many faiths for generations?
Well, I find it pretty ironic because, of course, it was under William Hague that the Conservative Party opposed Tony Blair when he wanted to, and indeed did, abolish Section 28 of the Local Government Act. That was the one that forbade the promotion of homosexuality in schools. And William Hague, led a party and decided that the policy would be that we were going to oppose the relaxation of that measure. So it's ironic now that William is saying that somebody looking back and saying that they would have voted in such and such a way should disqualify them from high office. It's a nonsense. Yes, I was very disappointed when William came up with that. Very disappointed indeed.
Yes, no, I too was surprised. So I wonder if I can tempt you away from morality onto Europe, which is a subject that is always at the forefront of our minds. Have you had a chance to look at the Windsor deal? Or the Brown Windsor soup, as one of my correspondents called it.
Well, it is a pretty good soup.
Not in detail.
I haven't, well, what I'd like to say, I haven't looked at it in great detail, but, there are obvious problems, even without taking a magnifying glass to it. One is, the Stormont break. I mean, yesterday that was hailed as something tremendous and innovative, and it was going to free Northern Ireland from EU rule. What a farce. It says it can only be applied in exceptional circumstances. So that means the vast majority of EU law will have to be accepted. It's only in exceptional circumstances, and then they have to go through goodness knows how many hoops. So that was a nonsense. We were told yesterday we have control of our own VAT. No, we don't. We can't control the VAT on, for example, alcohol sold in supermarkets, even if we can on alcohol sold in pubs. We haven't got back control of VAT. We were sold yesterday a packet of nonsense. And my only hope is that there are now going to be enough people looking at this, the DUP particularly, that it will unravel over the next week as people realise it isn't as it was presented. And the other thing which I haven't done, but which several of my fellow Brexiteers have done, is to look at the EU texts. They're not saying this is some great new thing. They're saying they've made a few concessions around the edges. And that's what it comes down to. But basically, Jacob, I mean, ask yourself this. You know, we are the country who fought the Second World War, who stood up to dictators. And are we really now that same country, which is grateful for concessions from a foreign power passing law which binds us?
Well, that's such a fundamentally good point, and it was really interesting that Ursula von der Leyen made clear that the European Court was going to continue interpreting European rules. I love the fact, Anne, that you say you haven't really looked at it in detail, and you know more details about it than almost anybody else I've spoken to in the last 24 hours. I think that is your typical modesty, and was one of the reasons of your great success as a line by line. But your point on the different texts from the EU and the UK government, I think, will be very telling. You said you hadn't done that yourself, but people had been telling you about that.
Yes, there's the former Brexiteer MPs, Brexit Party MEPs, still have a rather friendly group that exchanges information, and some of them are laser sharp on this sort of stuff and will go right to the original texts.
Well, of course, you were one of the most distinguished Brexit Party MEPs, along with my sister Annunziata, a fine and formidable combination. But thank you, Anne.